Hello, and welcome again to my second installment of the NFL exit previews I'm doing as I recap each team's NFL 2022 season with a brief look ahead to what's in store, what we can look at for the upcoming season, and first of all, the off season. I'm not going to be doing this every time, but since this is early in the process, I want to talk about what I'm covering in each of these preview reports. The purpose of this is really to spend about 15, 20 minutes, team by team, showing my process and what I look at before the season starts, what are my projections, any particular future bets I have, how the season played out, what are some of my keys for the season, and where they are as we exit 2022. This is my second installment. The first one was in the AFC South, which was with the Tennessee Titans, and we're staying in the AFC South, and we're going to be doing, for this one, the Indianapolis Colts. So the Indianapolis Colts ended 2021. Management, ownership, the coaching staff absolutely livid at the way Carson Wentz ended the season. With the playoffs easily in their grasp, Carson Wentz was a no-show due to COVID, and the Raiders upset the Colts in the next to last game of the season in 2021. And then a less than 100% Carson Wentz had a miserable game as they got upset by Jacksonville as a 17-point favorite. That ended the season, and Colt management couldn't wait to get rid of Carson Wentz. So once that happened, the team needed to be rebuilt around Jonathan Taylor, who had an amazing 2021. But there were some problems going in to 2022 that I want to highlight before I get into the seasonal keys. First of all, despite Taylor's amazing season, aided, in fact, by a I believe it was plus 14 turnover ratio in 2021. A lot of things did go right. Carson Wentz, actually, his stat sheet before that final game was quite good, and he didn't turn the ball over. He was leading the team on the field, not a great leader off the field, but leading the team to a point where they should have made the playoffs. The problems I had were basically sacks went down. They went down to 31, 33 in 2021, which is just not acceptable in this day and age. We figured that they would try to alleviate that problem by getting additional help in that area. And that's what the Colts did in the draft and in free agency. They really bumped up what was perceived to be a much better pass rush, much deeper pass rush group. And so I projected 41 sacks moving into 2022. One of the issues I've had with them all along has been their soft pass D scheme. They allowed almost 72%, almost a world record in 2018. And in the previous 2 years, I think it was 2019 actually, and the previous 2 years, 2020 and 2021, they allowed over 65%. This is a recipe for disaster. What happens is it's hard to protect leads, when you play a soft zone defense. So I was looking to see whether or not they would actually improve in that area, and they did change defensive coordinators. They moved on and hired Gus Bradley, who's had a decent but not spectacular track record in terms of making the pass D a little bit more relevant. They also brought in, of course, Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan is well respected as a leader in the locker room, on and off the field. They thought that figure would actually improve performance. I was a little bit more skeptical. Let me say that right. Skeptical. Boy, having trouble with that word. But I had some reservations with Matt Ryan because I didn't see his stat sheet as being better than Carson Wentz. In fact, I thought there would be a slight regression. The question was how many turnovers would he have? And really, I thought that wasn't necessarily the Colts' weakness. There were other weaknesses. But moving into 2022, the season to begin with, what we have here is my seasonal keys, and you're going to see them down at the bottom. One thing is they had one of the easiest schedules coming into 2022. They basically had the softest, in my opinion, and many other people's opinion, softest AFC schedule. And certainly, if you go back to my Tennessee preview, you'll see that the Tennessee Titans were playing all these number one teams: Tennessee, Green Bay, Buffalo, Kansas City, and the Colts would not have to play most of those teams. So right away, they had a schedule edge. Kind of a quirk in the schedule is that in weeks 1 to 7, unlike most other teams, the Indianapolis Colts were playing 5 divisional games in their very first 6, which means to me they had to be ready right out of the gate. They had to be ready with the new scheme with the defensive coordinator. They had to be ready with incorporating Ryan into the lineup, even though we know in preseason a lot of the starters do not play. There were some questions about Darius Leonard's health. There are a lot of things that had to go right away to see whether or not Indy would be able to manage these key divisional games right at the beginning of the schedule. They also had a late bye week, which also concerned me regarding fatigue. And one of the things I wanted them to do in the draft, but they didn't do, is they didn't beef up their offensive line. So I was a little bit worried to see how that would play out in terms of their ability to protect Matt Ryan. The schedule analysis that I do, by the way, included the fact that Indianapolis, even with a soft schedule, was one of the few teams, maybe one other team, that had to play 3 short week road games. And yes, in addition to the reports that I used to compile this exit report, such as my 32-page season preview, my 64-page, 2 pages per team draft recap, I also publish in May, late May, an 8-page schedule analysis. Each division, 1 page for each division, and Indianapolis' schedule was quite interesting if you consider all the front-loaded divisional games and those short week road games. Key number 1 for Indianapolis for me, and it's listed at the bottom: how do you replicate a plus 14 turnover ratio? Each turnover in the NFL is worth 3.5 points. So that's roughly around 50 points of an edge they got because they had 14 more turnovers than their opponents. That's hard to replicate. So I would expect and did expect that we would see regression in that area. When we talk about what actually happened in 2022, you'll see that it was enormous regression in terms of Indianapolis. But right away, a flat turnover ratio, if they were just +0 in 2022, they would be 50 points to the negative as compared to the +14 in 2021. And that was a red flag for me. Key number 2, going into the season, we didn't know whether Darius Leonard, one of the impact linebackers, I'd say a top 5 impact linebacker in the NFL, whether he was going to be healthy enough to start the season. And indeed, he wasn't, and health would prove to be a problem for him all season long. Because he is an impact player and a game changer, this meant that Indy absolutely had to deviate, in my opinion, from their soft zone defense in order to be effective defensively and to close games out, rather than lose late leads, or maybe they wouldn't be able to protect teams or prevent teams from running out the clock when the other teams had a short lead. So I was worried about Darius Leonard, and he certainly didn't look ready to start the season. My third key, always on my team sheet, I have 32 team sheets, is Gus Bradley. How would he do? Now, a lot of times you can't get a lot of information from preseason games. I used to get a tremendous amount of information when teams treated the preseason a little bit more seriously. Nowadays, you only get about 6 to 8 nuggets total, maybe a little bit more as far as preseason analysis. A lot of the analysis I get are from how the new coaches are doing, some of the new coordinators, and so on. What I found in the preseason with Gus Bradley is they didn't play a lot of starters. Obviously, Leonard didn't play much. I was still worried about their scheme. But basically, could Gus Bradley change the fortunes of what was generally a more passive defense overall? And finally, kind of a fourth key, it was interesting to me, is that Indianapolis had a lot of tall wide receivers on their roster. It's not one of those teams where they try, like Miami, to beat you with speed and slants and all these other different schemes that they want to use in order to create space. Speed is obviously the name of the game. But for the Colts and for quarterbacks who throw high balls, for some of the quarterbacks who don't throw on rhythm and timing, the Colts are an interesting team because they had 7 wide receivers and or tight ends that were listed at the beginning of the season at 6'3" or taller. And I was just curious in general how that would play out. Would that matter? Would they be able to complete more passes in the red zone because they had these taller targets? Just something I was kind of interested in. So basically, season win decisions, even with the easiest schedule, I couldn't bet an over for them. I tend not to bet overs, usually 1 or 2 season win overs per year. This year I actually had 3, but I had 12 season win unders. I couldn't bet the over. Too much uncertainty, too much variance. And I couldn't bet the under because this was going in a soft schedule and a division there for the taking. Tennessee's tough schedule. Houston had numerous problems. Jacksonville certainly looked improved, but how much improved, that remained to be seen. The roster was being rebuilt with a lot of free agents. So I stayed on the sideline for the Colts. But during the season, after that quarterly report, I take those first 4 games and see if I can get edges after the first 4 games. And I didn't play any games for or against Indianapolis until I had that 4-week sample size when I can trust my 2022 data. And so I'm looking at my team sheet now, and after 4 games, they had lost for the 7th straight time to Jacksonville, 24-0 at Jacksonville. They had that tie at the beginning of the year, 2020, to a very poorly coached Houston team. Actually should have lost that game. Then they come back and they upset Kansas City before losing a critical home game to Tennessee. Again, how they fared against Tennessee was probably going to determine, at least I thought at the beginning of the season, whether or not they would win the division. That was their first loss. 3 weeks later was their second loss against Tennessee. All of a sudden, they were 0-3 in the division to start. And we all know what happened from there, as Indy only won 4 games total. At the time of their 4 games, they had a 7-15 sack ratio. That means they had 7 defensive sacks. They had 15 offensive sacks allowed. They had a -6 turnover ratio with Matt Ryan throwing countless number of interceptions. They stopped the run, but they did not stop the pass. Again, Gus Bradley was not making a difference on the pass D. At that point, it was full go in terms of going against them, and that worked out quite well. In fact, I swept the board in terms of 5-0 playing on or against, 4 times against Indianapolis. The perception was still that they were better. Others felt that they were still better than Tennessee, Houston, and Jacksonville. My perception was that this was a flawed team in so many different ways, and it really played out. At the end of the year, without a healthy Darius Leonard, they still had over 40 sacks, but they allowed almost 69% pass completions, last or next to last in the league. And that was obviously going to kill them. And their turnover woes, they went from +14 turnovers to a -13 turnover ratio. And that's going to get you all the time. They couldn't make up ground, even as Tennessee was faltering because of their own limitations. It was a down year for Indianapolis. They fired their coach mid-season. As we all know, we saw Jeff Saturday take over. We saw some really bad performances down the road. 54 points allowed to Dallas, a 33-0 lead to Minnesota. it turned into an overtime 39-36 loss. This organization was completely lost and without direction for much of the second half of the season. They continued their turnover woes. They exited 2022. The coaching staff just was overmatched, and the writing was on the wall. They didn't do much damage at all at the end of the year. Those who faded Indianapolis kind of knew that a lot of the players, a lot of the coaches, their bags were packed. It was, to me, after week 4, an easy call to go against Indianapolis, where at the beginning of the season, quite honestly, I didn't know which way it would turn out. So now that we have that, what's the prognosis, the very early prognosis for 2023? And pretty much the answer is it's up in the air. As I record this, which is January 31st, we don't know who the head coach will be. We don't know if the scheme is going to change for 2023 as far as the defensive coordinator, a critical hire, in my opinion. What I do think will happen is that they're not going to be any worse on the turnover ratio. So if they get the right offensive coordinator, if they make some key decisions as to who their quarterback is going to be, and they've had a parade of quarterbacks, of course, since Andrew Luck, and you're better off trying to get one of the rookie quarterbacks and building for the long term rather than keep inserting a veteran quarterback 1 year at a time. I don't think Matt Ryan is the answer. I don't think the answer at quarterback is on their roster right now. Would they go after Derek Carr? Would they go after Jimmy G? All that remains to be seen. So I do expect the turnover ratio to improve, but there's way too much current uncertainty as far as making a prognosis as to whether or not I think they're going to be better or worse. I'd like to see more creative drafting from this team. The problem I have is that they draft a lot of rated players, but not a lot of impact players. They draft guys who can play in the NFL, but they're missing out. They need offensive linemen. They might need a little more speed. Obviously, they hope that Jonathan Taylor returns healthy, and I think he will. He's one part of the equation, but there's a lot of work to be done defensively. So that's my analysis right now in terms of the Indianapolis Colts. I thank you so much for viewing my second installment of the NFL Exit Report. The next ones, I still have 2 more teams to do in the AFC South. Hopefully one of them is going to be a surprise in terms of how I format it. But we have the Houston Texans up and the Jacksonville Jaguars still to go. So I hope you like this video. Any feedback is appreciated. And we'll see you for the next installment of the NFL Exit Report.